of a debacle that has been with the residential construction crisis hitting Victorians and first home buyers in Victoria in particular. So we've got a massive number of annual reports dumped today in an effort to hide transparency. The most important thing that Victorians will conclude as a result of these reports is that we see financial deficits for as far as the eye can see. Every annual report that we've so far looked at shows up deficits that continue to plague the Victorian economy and the Victorian budget. This government has lost control of Victoria's budget, and it's clear that Victorians are paying the price for this, whether it's massive hundreds of millions of dollars of deficits across health, work cover, which is headed up by the bumbling Minister Danny Pearson, has a deficit this year or last year of $176 million. And that's consistent with his reign as Minister for Work Cover. No wonder work cover is broke when we've got a minister who is so incompetent in Danny Pearson. So these annual reports show a long line of deficits with no sign that the Allen government has any better chance at getting control of the budget, which Daniel Andrews wasn't able to control as well. And Victorians will continue to pay the price for this financial mismanagement and waste. We'll say more about these deficits in the coming days as we pore over the reports and ask questions and raise issues about these annual reports. The main conclusion out of these annual reports today is that there are deficits for as far as the eye can see. Victorians are already hurting and they'll continue to be punished for the financial incompetence and waste of the Allen Labor government. I'll hand over to James Wood.
Thank you, John. Today we've seen a disturbing release of hundreds of reports, and when you go through the reports you see a wall of red debt. There's been no change. There may have been a change in Premier, but there's been no change in Labor. Hundreds of reports have been tabled today that hide shocking waste and mismanagement. But what's more concerning is not just the reports that have been released, it's what hasn't been released, which is required to have been released. A number of key reports have been hidden despite the fact that they should have been released to the public, and I've mentioned two of them. Ambulance Victoria, we saw shockingly, people dying waiting for ambulances, and to think that there's been no accountability in that report being released to the public to know what happened in Ambulance Victoria should concern every Victorian. But secondly, the SEC's first annual report has not been tabled. So we've had a government that's been holding weeks of media stunts, using question time to parade their SEC announcement. They've printed t-shirts, hats, and the SEC hasn't released its first annual report. So I'd say, if the SEC can't release its first report, how do you trust it to reduce energy prices for Victorians? Because that's what Victorians can conclude. If the SEC can't release its own report, it's certainly not going to reduce energy prices.
Questions?
John, just for the average punter on the street, why should it matter that the government's dumping 240 reports at a time?
There are two reasons why Victorians should be concerned about this. Dumping so many annual reports in this way is an attempt to hide transparency and stop proper scrutiny of the government's poor performance. And secondly, when you actually start going through the reports, Victorians will realise just how badly their government is being run, why ambulances are late, why hospital wait lists are going up, why schools are crumbling, why roads are riddled with potholes around Victoria, and why power prices are not coming down. That's why the way these reports have been dumped, but also what's in them when you actually start going through them, should concern every Victorian, because they affect each and every one of us as Victorians. Sorry, Rich, I didn't get the same. I think you'll understand that they've only been dumped this morning, so they'll be going through it. But we know how important it is to go through these reports, and we will. And Shadows will be making statements about these annual reports in the coming days, because it's important Victorians know how badly their government is being run. And it doesn't matter that there's a change in Premier. It's the same old wasteful, incompetent and corrupt Labor Party running the state. And these reports show they're running it really badly.
Just in terms of policy and transparency, if you were Premier, would would you authorise the same thing to occur? Essentially, 200 or so reports released on one day at one time? Or would you reform the way that public agencies report to government and how they report to the people of Victoria?
Yeah, of course I would. And of course I would look at a way where annual reports are released in a timely way, where agencies are held to strict guidelines and timelines so that the Victorian people can see them as and when they come out. The idea that you can dump nearly 230 reports in one day, all conveniently landing on the one day, is really not acceptable. I believe that you get better outcomes for Victorians when there is proper scrutiny, when there is actual transparency. So we'll be very different to the Labor Party.
Is one of the issues with this matter that Vargo essentially has to sign off on each of the, well, most of the substantive reports, and they have a bit of a backlog. It's, 3 months after the end of financial year, and ultimately now is a natural time for this to be tabled. How do you reform that?
The first thing we've got to do is not let this Labor government off the hook by blaming Vargo, if that's what they're trying to do. The second thing is that the opposition has made it clear consistently we will support our integrity agencies, whether it's the Auditor General, whether it's the Ombudsman or IBAC. We will support our integrity agencies in the conduct of their work.
Does anything stand out as to being particularly bad from what you've seen so far?
Well, the level of deficits across health, over $800 million. Work cover is particularly concerning. Like James said, we're very concerned that the first annual report of the SEC hasn't been made available yet, and it should be. If they're in a position where they can, have jackets made and a whole bunch of other items made for promotional purposes, but not actually do the real work that the SEC is supposed to be doing, that should concern us, because remember, Victorians are going through a cost of living crisis. Chief among the burdens Victorians are bearing are rising power prices. And what the SEC is showing is that the government actually doesn't have a plan, because the SEC, as we stand here today, the SEC has no projects, no partners, no funding. All that the SEC is a certificate of incorporation with $20 of share capital. That's all the SEC has. And Jacinta Allen and Tim Pallas are the two shareholders with $10 shares in the SEC. That's about it right now. So if the government is saying it's got a plan, it should really help Victorians out by detailing what that plan is.
Just on, you mentioned ambulance, or both of you mentioned Ambulance Victoria having been tabled, though when you look at the Department of Health's report, elective surgery admissions have been down 17%, and then Esther's report shows that Ambulance Victoria fell short of the benchmark. Given that we don't have a full picture, I guess, from the Ambulance Victoria report, what do you take out of that as to the state of the health system at the moment?
The state of Victoria's health system is a crisis. I mean, just about every week, all of you are reporting on one crisis in the health system or another, whether it's rodents running through our hospitals, whether it's plans to ship people out to regional Victoria because our Melbourne and outer suburban health networks are struggling to meet demand for surgical procedures and other types of care, and amongst other health disasters across our system. We're very concerned about the state of health, and this is Victoria. Victorians deserve to have a first-class health system, and they're not getting it. We have the best staff in the country, we just have the worst government in the country running it. And they need to get serious about investing in our health system, and they can't do that because they're wasteful and incompetent. We've seen that on so many occasions, whether through Com Games or other instances where the government has been completely wasteful, and we've spoken to you about those issues many times.
And on the 48 report, 48 notifications about explanations from the Assistant Treasurer, have you had a look at those and the reasons that the government gave for those reports not to come out? Are they genuine?
Yeah, I might get James to talk about that, but I haven't seen the letter. I'm aware one has been provided. But what possible excuse can you have? It's not like the government has a heavy legislative program. The one thing we could at least expect it to do is make sure the agencies under its control can deliver their annual reports on time. From time to time, there might be reasons why an agency can't meet that timeline. But we're in November now, and these issues have been front and centre of the public discourse in Victoria for many months now, and they're aware of how eagerly we're all awaiting performance reports on these agencies, particularly in the health sector. I mentioned also the Victorian Building Authority, where we're talking about housing and home ownership every day of the week. These reports should be made available. The government knows how important they are and how much we want to see them. I'm not sure if you had anything to add on that, James.
There are almost 50 reports that haven't been tabled, and the Minister has given excuses in some circumstance why they haven't been tabled. There's no excuse for some of those reports not being tabled. I tried to take the opportunity to talk to the Minister about it, but he didn't take me up on that offer to talk about it and as to why some of those reports hadn't been tabled. But frankly speaking, a number of these reports are very serious. They go to public safety, they go to health services, they go to, as I mentioned, the SEC in its first annual report. These reports shouldn't be delayed. There shouldn't be excuses for reports not being delivered on time, and especially administrative reasons given. Victorians deserve to know what's happening with their money, what's happening with the services they deserve to receive, and so frankly, the government hasn't done what it needs to do in terms of delivering the reports in their required time.
Just on another matter,
Yeah, sure.
John, yesterday the Attorney General said that she had reached out and rung you personally and Brad Batten when you moved your bill to prevent Paul Denny from coming out of jail in June, but she said the call was never taken. The request for a meeting with you to speak about your bill was never taken up. Why is that?
No, I did speak to Jacqueline Symes. I recall a discussion with her. I just didn't accept her reasons for delay. For me and my colleagues, this was a fairly straightforward process. We had precedents in this field. Craig Minogue, Julian Knight. They were solid precedents which had, in each case, withstood legal challenges as far as the High Court. They were solid. There was no reason for delay. Jacqueline Symes was delaying because she didn't know what to do. And with all due respect, she didn't appear to me, when I spoke to her, to be across her brief. And our concern was the families and community safety. We saw it as a fairly straightforward exercise of doing what had been proven to work previously, to keep Paul Denyer behind bars. And so we made the decision. We're not going to accept delay for political reasons. Whatever political debates internally that were racking the Labor Party at the time were not our concern. Our concern were the families and community safety. And then after all of that mucking around and delaying by Jacqueline Symes and her government, they've landed where we wanted them to be all along.
So you didn't take up a meeting request with them?
With her?
Yeah, that's what she says. She requested a meeting.
Well, I can't recall whether we discussed an actual meeting request or not, but in any event, we were fairly clear. We knew what needed to be done, and as it turns out, even she now accepts that we were right.
Now that you've had a chance to look at that legislation, do you agree with the what would be your position?
We'll make an internal decision about that, but I expect that we'll be very supportive of this and we'll want to see it go through as quickly as possible.
Just on the container deposit scheme,
It's
it's launched today. Apparently on the website there's a bunch of sites that say that they're taking recycling, but they're not. Is that a surprise?
Look, unfortunately the container deposit scheme has been 5 years in the making, and it's been a total stuff up that hasn't been delivered on time. And we have a bill before the Parliament currently that sets out the funding arrangements. So we have a scheme that starts today. We have site rollouts for consumers that are well under the benchmark of where the government set the need at. And the funding scheme to make it work hasn't even passed the Parliament. The scheme has been totally stuffed up by the government.
Thank you very much. Cheers. And feel free to help yourself to